All right, Jvox. So, Reboot Part 7. We've been talking a lot about what it means to reset, have like a fresh look at what we believe. And I'm going to make fun of one of my friends at the moment because, and here's the deal, it's not gossip because I've made fun of him to his face numerous times, okay? So I would say this to him. I'll say it to you now. Many years ago, he got a very, very regrettable tattoo. He made a terrible choice, okay? Now, here's the deal. I don't like, I'm scared to get a tattoo because I know what would happen is I'd put something on my body, and within like a year, I'd be like, that was stupid, right? Like, I just feel like that. And my friend, he made a terrible choice. As soon as I tell you what he put, I need y'all to groan, okay? He had 4 words tattooed on his body, on his forearms, and it was, "You only live once." Oh. Because here's the deal. That's not a great tattoo for many reasons. One, because it's biblically untrue. But 2, because nobody ever uses that phrase for anything good and meaningful, right? You don't ever say like, YOLO, I'm going to go to Yale. You don't ever say, YOLO, I'm going to settle down and get married. Nobody ever says, YOLO, I'm going to eat healthy today. No. You say YOLO before you're about to do something that might kill you, right? You say, hey, you only live once, and you eat the hottest pepper in the world, right? You say, you only live once, and you try that, like, cafeteria food concoction thing that you're like, this might kill me, right? That's never, ever a good idea. We don't ever say that to mean anything good, but we need to talk today about this life and the next. This life and the next life. Because in Hebrews 6, chapter 6, verse 2, and this is what we had based this whole series on. This is where we got all of our weeks from. It says, you don't need more instruction about baptisms and the laying on of hands and the resurrection of the dead and eternal judgment. And I have a feeling that those last phrases, the resurrection of the dead and eternal judgment, are phrases that you don't swap in between classes in the hallways, right? Like, you have never walked by somebody in your school and be like, hey man, how you doing? Have you been thinking about the Last Judgment recently? Right, that's never come up. You've never been playing a video game and being like, hey, so what do you think about the resurrection of the dead, right? Like, that never came up. You were never watching a TikTok where somebody was like, resurrection and death, right? Like, that didn't happen, okay? You've not, and so this is something that we need to talk about. We need to talk about a heavy question this morning. And I don't think anybody says it better than Ned from Spider-Man. We're all gonna die, right? There's a reality that we're going to face death someday, okay? Now, we could talk about, like, there is a chance one day Jesus is going to return, and he could return during your life, and that might mean you might avoid death. But we're going to talk this morning about what happens when we die. And the main takeaway for this morning is that people need to know where they're going to go. That you need to know what's going to happen when you die. You need to know the answer to the question, what happens when I die? Where do I go? What happens? There's a lot of popular answers to this question, what happens when we die? I think one of them is that nothing happens when we die, right? When we die, nothing happens. Maybe we just turn to dirt and worms eat the dirt, right? I mean, it's just like nothing happens. You live your whole life. When you die, you're dead. Right? That's an option that we hear a lot. I feel like a lot of people that I know that aren't Christians would say, like, yeah, when you die, that's it. That's the end. It's over. And what's crazy to me is when I think about, if you think about that, what that means is that nothing in this life actually matters. Like, if nothing happens when we die, then nothing you do in this life matters at all. Because if after this life it's just over, you're dust. Everything ends. If that's all that happens, then there's no difference between you being a nice person and bringing people cupcakes and being like, I love you, cupcakes, right? And being a terrible person that steals everybody's cupcakes. There's no difference if nothing happens when we die. It's a really loaded belief that if nothing happens when we die, then nothing matters in this life. But that's something that people say. When we die, nothing happens. Another thing that people will talk about is maybe that there's a reincarnation, right? This idea that when we die, you have more than just a body, right? So if you believe that nothing happens, you believe that all you are is a physical body. But in reincarnation, they say, well, okay, if you when you die, you have a physical body that goes down into the earth, and but then your soul or your spirit that gets placed back into some other life. And the most popular view of this is that if you do good in this life, like if you're a good person, you do nice things in this life, when you die, that spirit would go back and your next life would be slightly better, right? So if you were a good person in this life, according to reincarnation, you'd come back in the next life and you'd have like a little more money. You'd be in a nicer house, right? You'd grow up in a fancier place. You'd be like, this is bougie. I like this, right? If you were terrible, you might come back as like as a grasshopper, right? You might, if you were really bad in this life, you might come back and you'd be a grasshopper and you'd be like, this life is, oh man, that was a terrible grasshopper I just killed, right? I mean, like your life would get worse, right? That's the idea. That's the idea in reincarnation, that you come back over and over and over. There's another idea that I think lives out there, and it's this idea that I call bliss, right? It's the idea that when everyone dies, we're all going to the same place, and this place is incredible, right? People say like, well, when everybody dies, we're all going to the same place. We're going to, it's like a field full of puppies, and it's filled with bounce houses, and the only liquid is ice cream, and it's just wonderful, right? Like, I mean, doesn't that sound, it's like Defy met Menchie's. I mean, it's just perfect in every way, right? I mean, it's just full of everything that you could ever, and everybody goes, everybody, right? This idea that it doesn't matter how you live, but you do have a spirit, and when you die, it's just all nice, and everybody gets mushed into this really nice, peaceful place. We play music and video games, and we just chill and eat, right? And it just sounds like a great old time. So you have these three views that I think run out in the wild. People might believe that nothing happens when we die. People might believe that the spirit just recycles over and over. People believe that when you die, you just everybody goes to some kind of heaven. But I think the Bible teaches us something a little differently. And I'm going to look at Luke chapter 16, verse 22 and 23. And here's the deal. We're jumping into the middle of a story. So Jesus is actually telling a bigger story. We're jumping into the middle. But I want you to read these verses with me, because Jesus breaks all three of those in two sentences. He just points out how wrong those three views are in two sentences. This is really important. Let's look at this. Luke 16, verse 22. He says this: the time came when the beggar died. So there was a poor guy, and he died. His name was Lazarus, right? And the angels carried him to Abraham's side. The rich man also died, and he was buried. In Hades, where he was in torment, he looked up and saw Abraham far away with Lazarus by his side. In just those two verses, there's a lot packed in here, and it tells us a lot about what happens when we die. Because the very first thing it says that when we die, you are more than just a physical body. You're more than just matter. You're more than just mass. You're more than just your skin. And you could pinch yourself right now and be like, ow. But you could also pinch yourself and go, not ow, right? There's something else inside of you. Have you ever thought about thinking? Or then thought about the concept of thinking about thoughts, right? And maybe you got like 4 layers deep where you're like, how is it that a mind can think thoughts about thinking other thoughts? Thoughts, right? I mean, you just go like, there's this point where you realize that you are more than just a physical body. That there's something beyond just your brain. There's something beyond just this body. And Jesus says, yes, there's more than just your physical body. So nothingness is not the right answer to what happens when we die. And then he says, when the beggar died, that angels carried his spirit to a place. It took his spirit. So he took the spirit to this heavenly place, this spiritual place, this paradise place. Like he took him to a good place. And the Bible name drops here. And it's like, well, the poor guy got to hang out with Abraham, which I don't know if that gets you excited. Like, because most of us, I don't know that like Abraham's the guy you're like, oh man, I want to chill with Abe when I get to heaven, right? We're more like, I want to meet, we have like celebrities that we want to meet, or, we have like different like influencers that we're like, oh gosh, I would love to meet them. Like Korean pop bands. We're like, I'd love to. Yeah, I knew that'd get you. But like we have these people, but he's like, oh, he gets to chill with Abraham, and we're like, dope, all right? So, but the angels carried him to a place. And the other guy, the rich man, he goes to Hades. He goes to a place of torment. And so what happens? Well, we see that nothing isn't the right answer to what happens when we die. Neither is reincarnation. Because at the moment of their death, they're both taken to other places. They're not sent back in. They're not put back into the system. They're sent to different places. And then it's not that everyone goes to the big puppy farm. It's 2 separate places. There's a place of torment and a place of paradise. And so what happens when we die is that there's a judgment made. There's an assessment that goes on. When you die, your life will be looked at. It will be assessed. Something is going to look and say, what did you do in this life? Your life will be judged. Now, I know as soon as I say the word judge, it's not really a word that we like a whole lot, but we get judged for things all the time, and some of it is really good, right? Some of it we don't like. We don't like when people judge us on things that are bad, right? Like if somebody judges you on your appearance, okay? That's not a good thing. That's not fair. That's not kind, right? Right? So when somebody judges you on your appearance, you're like, whatever. I don't need to hear you. I don't need to listen to that, right? Whatever to that. But when somebody's able to look at all of the grades that you've turned in, like an entire quarter's worth of work that you have turned in, and your teacher comes back and says, okay, this was worth a D. You're like, no. I did none of that work. I deserve an A, right? That doesn't work, right? You don't get to come back and be like, listen, I didn't learn anything the entire quarter, but I want an A, right? You don't get to go back and be like, listen, I know I ignored you and I talked over you and I didn't listen to a thing you said. I didn't do any of the work that you assigned me, but I would like an A. Can you do that, right? Does that work? No, it doesn't work unless maybe you're homeschooled and your mom's like, okay, honey, right? That doesn't work. That doesn't work. You get judged based on what you did. And the Bible says that there's something that's incredible that happens when we die. Because we need to look back this morning on what's the entire purpose of this life. See, the purpose of this life is to get to know God, to know your Creator, to have a relationship with Jesus. And from the beginning, when God created all things, His longing was that people would get to enjoy Him and be with Him and be part of a good and perfect creation. Like when you look at the way that God created the world at the beginning, it's really awesome. Every single day that he creates something, he sits back and he goes, "Oh, that's good." You ever like created something and you get to sit back? You drew something, you sat back and you're like, "Oh, that's good," right? Or maybe you were writing a paper and you like got to the end of a sentence and like hit an end of a paragraph and you were like, "Oh, that's good," right? You just felt like you're like, "I'm a genius," right? You typing something in. You ever played something? You stoop back and make the shot and you're like, "Oh, that's good," right? You just feel you like there's something like you created something. You're like, "Oh, that's good. That's good." And the Bible says that when God created the whole world, he just sat back and he was like, that's good, right? And he was longing for you and I to get to be a part of something that's good, something that is perfect. He built this perfect system so that you would get to be a part of something that's incredible and awesome and perfect. And then we know the story. We know what happened. Every single one of us did something wrong. Adam and Eve sinned. They brought sin into humanity, but you and I have done our own sin plenty of times. Every single one of us has sinned. We've done things that are wrong, and so we've helped make this earth an imperfect place. We've helped make this system bad. We've helped to bring down the things around us. So we're part of this imperfect world, for sure. But God is still longing for you and I to get to be a part of a good and perfect creation. And so what he's going to do is he's going to look at what you did with his son Jesus. He's going to look at your life and say, "What did you do with Jesus?" And if you listen to the message about Jesus and you heard what was said, and you responded. You said, "Jesus, I'm in. I need you to save me. I want to follow you." And you spend your days pursuing Jesus. Then at the end of it all, God's going to invite you back in. But there's another group and there's another side. There's people that will reject the message. Will reject what they hear about Jesus. Will reject this story. Will reject this idea and say, "Listen, I just want to do what I want to do. I want to be in charge. I want to live the way that I want to live. I don't want to have to submit to Jesus. I don't want to have to depend on Jesus. I'm just going to live the way I want to live." And when they die, God's not going to force them to go to heaven. Because do you know what heaven is? Heaven is the presence of God. And if you've spent your entire life saying, "I don't want to be in the presence of God," God's not going to make you be in there for eternity. Do you get that? Like if you spend your life saying, "God, I don't want any part of you," then at the end of your life, God's not going to say, "Well, here's all of me forever." But to those who say, "God, I want part of you. I want to know you. I want to be with you." When you die, heaven is open to you. The invite is open. And heaven's going to be incredible. How many of you were in first service here at this church this morning? Oh, yeah, it was good. I know, you sat behind me. It was so good, guys. They were talking about heaven, and they got ahead of me. Pastor Jeff got a little ahead of me because there's a verse where he says, "No eye has seen and no ear has heard what God has prepared for those who love him." And I love this. I love this because think about this. If you had to think right now about how awesome heaven is, you and I would fall way short. Like if you had to think about the most incredible, if you have to think about that, the most incredible and most joyous moment you've ever had in your life, right? Think about the best moment you have ever lived, right? Maybe it was your 8th birthday. You were hyped up on Mountain Dew. You had just eaten like 3 donuts and a whole box of pizza by yourself, and it's like midnight, and you're like, "This is life," right? Like you have all your best friends, right? And they think you're the bomb, right? I mean, it's just the best. It's the highest moment of your life, and you're like, "This is incredible," and I'm just telling you, that you're like at 30% of heaven, right? You're like not even scratching the surface, because the Bible says that no eye has seen, no ear has heard how great it is. And I just think this is incredible, because we can look around and we can see incredible experiences on this earth, can't we? Like the fact that we have social media, you can look at some of the best things that are happening in the entire world. You can look at like some of the greatest vacation spots in the world, right? You get to see some of the best spots, the most gorgeous spots in the world. You get to see the best games that have ever been created, because they're right now, right? You get to see the world. You get to see everything. You get to see pictures and videos of some of the most incredible experiences on this earth. You get to see people like skydiving, which doesn't sound like a great experience to me, but some people are like, this is the greatest thing ever, right? Falling out of a plane, right? It's a terrible idea. But anyway, you have access to see these incredible experiences. People at their peak, and they're like, this is amazing. This is the best of life. And God says, you have no idea how good heaven is. You have no idea how great heaven is. Nobody's seen or heard anything close to this. Nobody's felt anything near this. And the Bible tells us why. Because it says that in God's presence is the fullness of joy. In God's presence is the fullness of joy. And here's the thing. All of us are living on this earth, and we feel something. We feel that this earth is broken, don't we? I mean, anytime that you sit back and you're sad, you're angry, you're hurt, you realize that this world is broken. Anytime that you look at somebody around you and you see them in pain, you see them suffering, you see them in angst, you realize and recognize that this earth is broken. And God is looking forward to the day when you and I get to experience an unbroken world. When you and I get to experience the perfection of its presence. When you and I get to be with him as he is in the fullness. And so I want to ask this morning, do you know where you'll go? Like when you die, and I know that's a difficult thing to wrestle through. You're 11, 12, 13, 14 maybe. But do you know what happens? Have you had a moment where you've called out to Jesus and said, Jesus, I'm going to follow you? Or are you living in rejection of this? That's it. That's the decision. That's the moment. That's the question. What have you done with Jesus? What will you do with Jesus? And this morning, my hope is that every single one of you could be confident